Hi, everyone. Welcome to this session today. Hi, everyone. Hope you're excited to be here. I'm very excited to be here. My name is Fisayo. I am I graduated from my MBA program at Arizona State University, and I am here to welcome you all to the GMAT Club MBA walkthrough. It's basically a 6-week series covering applications to top MBA programs. And so every Thursday and Friday for the next 6 weeks, we'll be featuring admission experts and admission teams going step by step through like every step of the application process. So please be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and to stay updated and to support us in any event that we publish. So I'll be your host today, and in this walkthrough session, we're covering INSEAD Business School. So together with me is Susan. She's the founder of SIA Admissions. Susan has helped 100 of people, to finish out their MBA programs. Their MBA applications. So she's very excited to be here this morning or afternoon, depending on where you're watching us from. So welcome, Susan. It's very great to have you. Over to you.
Thank you, Fisayo. Thank you so much. And I'm really excited to be here and talking about the INSEAD application. I know I was looking at YouTube and saw a lot of interest in this topic. So I'm really, really excited to hear all the questions that people will have. So I encourage everyone to just write along any areas that I'm covering that you would like us to spend a little bit extra time talking about in relation to your questions. Fisayo will be moderating those, and I'll be happy to answer. So for the purposes of this application, I'm Carl Jung. For those who do not know, Carl Jung is a psychologist that I admire. So I created this application under his name. So I wanted to do a full walkthrough of when you actually are in the INSEAD application portal, and what are you going to see as a first-time applicant. So I believe my screen is being shared. So the first thing you're going to do, this is really an empty space right now. Nothing has been created. You're going to go in here in the degree programs, and hopefully this is going to work correctly. Okay, perfect. So we are going to choose the class that you are applying to. I am going to go today with the August 2024 entry. But if you're looking to apply in January, you would choose your January application itself. So once you select your application, you're going to see a screen that looks similar to this. The first step is to choose your campus. You have the France campus or the Singapore, or you can choose either campus if you really don't have a preference. So I'm just going to choose either campus, and it's fine. So there's no component in here that it's they prefer one or another. It's really truly your preference. So one thing that I will say throughout this application process, one thing I recommend to my clients is that they go through every single section. So if you see here the content, you're going to have 14 different sections. The 14th is really uploading documents, so you don't need to necessarily worry too much about that one at this point. But I would go through each section and copy and paste all the questions with word count limitations or character count limitations into a Word document, because that will allow you to really refine and go through each of the materials that you need to include, and it allows you to really just work through it, and then you can copy and paste those into the portal itself later on. It also ensures that you don't accidentally not save your edits, because if you don't save the edits, you may lose the work that you have done. So it's always a best practice to make sure that you are working through this document in a way that it's most effectively, you're going to actually make sure that you're saving your progress, because it's a lot. And I haven't seen anyone be able to sit down, for 2 hours and be able to complete this in one go. You really will need a few, sessions to go through the entire materials. So that's my first commentary here. But if you want to be brave and want to complete it in the application portal, then just make sure you keep on hitting the save button all the time. So I'm not going to necessarily fill in information myself, but we're going to go through each of the components, and you'll see a little bit of a red mark here that says you haven't completed sections that are required, but that's okay because we don't necessarily need to go through that. So the personal data in here, you're going to obviously enter your name, your date of birth. Anything with an asterisk is a required field. Your address, your phone number. This is just truly basic information. I don't necessarily need to go through all the details. They do ask that you include your LinkedIn ID or professional networks. This is business schools. They do prefer to see how you are presenting yourself in social platforms. And I don't mean that here you need to include your Instagram and Facebook. It's really the more professional network, which is LinkedIn. Any questions on that we're getting? I think we can proceed from here.
No questions yet.
Awesome. Okay. So as I said earlier, there is a little bit of a area that I didn't complete in the previous section. So you'll see a little window pop up, but that's okay. You can just continue through it to collect the information that you need. INSEAD, I know I oftentimes hear this debate that INSEAD really wants the GMAT and not the GRE, and which one should you take? Should you sit for? What's important here is really changes have happened, and a lot more schools are much more familiar with the GRE. And either one that you have enrolled in or either one that you've taken, so long as you show your best self, that's really what matters. So here they want you to include all the tests, all the official tests that you have taken, and all the scores, and you have an opportunity to add rows if you've taken it 3, 4, 5 times, however many times you've taken each of the tests. There is also an English proficiency, especially for those who are coming from where English was not taught in school. So you have the various different English proficiency tests that you will be required to take. Only one of them, but choose the one that resonates most with you. And if you are typically from an international background, you want to look at what are the tests available in your region and what's the most accessible one as well. I think this is really straightforward, so we don't need to spend too much time in this component, but just make sure that you are sending your test scores, not just including it here, because as you can see, you will have an area in the supporting documents to upload your test scores, but they do want the official test to come from the test center. So here are the codes that you need for INSEAD. Then your academic degrees are the next component. Typically, what is required is an undergraduate degree, but there are applicants who are applying with already having completed a graduate level degree of some kind. So you're going to include that information here, and in the supporting documents, you're going to upload transcripts. Typically, you will be asked, essentially, for most of the schools, this is true, you'll be asked to send the official transcript from the school if you are admitted to the program and you've accepted INSEAD as the institution where you want to complete your MBA. So there is typically costs to requesting an official transcript to be sent to the school, and this is a way that they allow you to, save a bit in the application process by not requesting every single one to send official transcripts to the school. And also they don't need extra material on their end. It's only the ones that they're admitted and they have accepted the admission. In the academic section, there's also any academic awards and distinctions. So you're going to include information here, and you're going to attach copy of the awards in the supporting documents. If it doesn't apply to you, that's okay. It's not required. And don't feel like your application is not not going to be competitive if you don't have any awards, but they do want to hear about them if you do.
Susan, can I take you back a little?
Yeah.
So someone asked if the TOEFL or IELTS is compulsory for international students. So I know that you mentioned that if you come from a background where English is not your first language, you'll be required to take that exam. But is that specific for all international students, especially for those who have English as their first language?
So every school is a little bit different. If for INSEAD, if you have not been taught your undergraduate, essentially, degree in English, then you will need to take one of these English proficiency tests. And that applies to, most candidates who are applying from international schools that English is not the first language.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. And we'll talk a bit more about languages later, because we'll see that component show up in INSEAD's application.
Okay.
Perfect. So the next, section 5 of the application portal for INSEAD is the current work experience. So this is broken down into two. One is the current work experience, and then there's a professional background. So anything here is what INSEAD wants to know around what is it that you're currently doing, or what is it that what was your last job if you're coming in with having been laid off and not having an opportunity, not having a job secured at the moment. So this is basic information, the company, the company information, right? So where is it, their location, their postal code, number of employees locally, company revenue, all this information typically is available online, especially if it's a bigger organization. But if it's a private organization, small company, you can, still give an estimate number there. They want to know about your job title and your function, dates of appointment. All of this is very standard. Gross annual revenue, and then salary currency. INSEAD is one of those schools that has, 90% of their student body is considered international. So you want, they're really wanting to understand your salary and the where your salary falls in the scheme of the region that you are in. So, for example, an American is going to apply and maybe their salary is $100,000, but someone from India is going to apply and their salary is, I don't know, maybe $40,000. And on paper, they may have, the same role, and the person from India may be worried about the fact that their salary is not up to par to the American, but they're not really, the admission team is not really looking at it from that perspective. They're looking at it from the perspective of where do you fall in the regions that you are coming from in that kind of role, and not necessarily an apples to apples comparison on a global scale. If there are bonuses that are part of your salary, part of your package, you want to include that as well. And then contact information. May we contact the employer? Typically, the contacting doesn't happen until you are admitted. So the worry is always going to be, well, I haven't told my employer that I'm applying. I don't know if I'm going to be admitted. There's a lot of insecurity around that, justifiably so. But know that the schools are not going to jeopardize your employment. And typically, this contacting happens as part of the background check that happens after you're admitted, after you've accepted an offer from the school. And if you are at an employer that is sponsoring your education, you want to identify that section here. If you are applying for scholarship, all of that information is included in here. Any questions on this that has come in? No? Okay, I'll proceed. Okay, so we're going to move to section 3. This section is talking about your professional background. Some schools have sections where they will limit how many employers will you include. Other schools, like INSEAD, they want every single full-time job that you've held to be included in here, and you have an opportunity to add rows. As you can see, there's a lot of interest in the country and territories or regions that you're in. INSEAD is one of those international, one of those business schools that really values international background, just because 90+% of their students are coming from all different backgrounds, and they really want to make sure that the people they're admitting into the program are interested in being in an international setting and are comfortable being outside of their comfort zone. The more you can showcase that you have an inclination towards being comfortable in those spaces, and sometimes that shows up in the territory, sometimes that shows up in your resume, in your essays, all of that. All of those components are important, but just be mindful as you're putting together this application to speak to the extent that it's true, your exposure with diverse backgrounds. They also want you to calculate the number of months that you've held full-time positions. So this means sometimes this means that it's from the time you graduated college until now. If there have been gaps in your employment, then you would reduce the number of months of those gaps from that total number. So, for example, if you have 4 years of work experience and 6 months of that 4 years has been you looking for a job, then it would be 3 years and 4 months of full-time work experience. If that is the case for you, then you also need to explain, meaning if there's a gap in employment, you need of more than 2 months, you will need to explain, the time, and essentially you have 40 words, right, to respond to this. Why was there a gap and what were you doing essentially during that gap? You should say something more than just I was looking for a job, because that is, of course, obvious. But that would mean something like, in addition to looking for a job, I was networking, I was taking a class, or whatever you were doing to bolster your candidacy so that you can secure that next opportunity.
Susan, we have a question here. So someone has asked that what is the best way to fill out the form if they are the CEO of their own startup?
As far as I'm assuming the current employer?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you would essentially just fill it in as you are so I'm going to go back to this current work experience. You're going to fill in the information just as you currently are, right? So your job title would be CEO. Your function is going to be, you have to figure out kind of where do you fall in this list. So you choose one that most resonates, and you would complete it just as if you were an employee of someone else, essentially. Now, may we contact your employer component? Maybe that's where the question is. You can say yes. If you have an HR team, you would include their contact information. Or if you have a partner or someone else that can essentially speak to your time there, you would include that as well. If you are the CEO and you have legal documentation to showcase that, you can add that in the supplementary information at the end, but they will be contacting you to verify those details, and you can choose to do that later on as well.
Okay. Another question on the work experience bit. So someone is asking if they have more than 10 years work experience, is that a disadvantage in any way?
It depends a little bit in essentially what is it that you want to do. So with 10 years of work experience, you are totally okay still applying for a full-time MBA, but you do need to speak to essentially why is it that you want an MBA at this point in your career. Now, it may be that you haven't progress, or you reached a sort of like a ceiling as to where you can go, and you need the next level training to get to the next chapter in your career. Because the question is always going to be, why aren't you considering doing an executive MBA as opposed to a full-time traditional MBA? So you really want to justify what you want to explain, not even justify, just explain why is it important for you to apply to a full-time program as opposed to an executive MBA at the time. Awesome. Any other questions?
None for now.
Awesome. All right, then I'll continue. We already covered professional background, and we're going to go into the job description section. Now, this has a lot of short answer questions. And if you look at US applications, you'll have, some character count limitation on how you're answering these questions. And you have essays that are anywhere between, 250 words and 900 words, like Harvard's application, for example. Here, this segment is just the job description. And if you can see, each one of them is going to have 200, 300, 100 words, and these are required responses. So when I mentioned earlier that the European schools have a lot more, it's almost like two applications in the US category. This is what I mean, is that you have a lot of questions that are part of the application portal that are not necessarily considered essays, although you are responding in somewhat of a extensive enough detail for the schools. So it's really important that you take the time to develop these external to the application portal and make sure that you are really fully answering the questions before you copy and paste them in here, and then before you submit your application. So the first question is, briefly summarize your current or most recent job, including the nature of work, major responsibilities, and where relevant, employees under your supervision, size of budget, client, product, and results achieved. This is a very specific question that they're looking for. We'll talk more about the resume in a little bit, but sometimes applicants include this information in their resume. You are going to not want to repeat yourself. So if you've included it in your resume, you may want to consider, is it more beneficial for your resume to not have the job description and just have achievements and then include it here? Or are you going to write an expanded version of your resume in here? That's really up to you and the spacing that you have and the spacing you're working with. But one thing it's really important is that you don't copy paste or say, see resume, which I've seen before, and it's a major faux pas. You do not do that in your applications. So you're going to want to be as descriptive as possible, and just really, when you answer the questions, just follow the order of what they're asking you. So what is the nature of the work? What are your responsibilities? Macro level scale, excuse me. If you supervise anyone, or if it's a dotted line supervisory role, which means you're not their direct supervisor, but you are supervising them on a given project, you will indicate that. If you have a budget you're working with, you would include that. If not, that's not necessary. And if you're working directly, if you're in a client-facing role, talk about the kind of clients you support. If you are working on products, what kind of product are you working on? So especially if it's more than one product. And all of this is to then talk also about what in a macro level scale, not in a project level scale, but on a macro level scale, what kind of achievements have you accomplished in your role? So this is looking at your role from like a 10,000 feet perspective, and looking at your cumulative contributions and achievements. And you have to do that in 200 words. Next question is, what would be your next step in terms of position if you were to remain in the same company instead of going to business school? INSEAD really wants to know that you want to be there and you have a plan of action. It's really important because you only have 1 year to be there, and there's not a lot of room for exploration. You are expected to have thought through the various different sort of avenues that you are planning to take, and this is going to be really emphasized in your INSEAD interview. So just make sure that you have thought all of these things out, and you continue to develop and talk about it with as many people as possible about your goals, and make sure that they are ambitious but also attainable and achievable. So what happens if you don't go to business school is what this question is. How would you progress in your career direction? So here you would talk about what would be the next level in your career. And if there is no level in your career, if there is no next level in your career, what would be the next step? What would you be doing differently? So perhaps you would be changing jobs. It may mean that especially if you're looking to transition into a new field, it may mean you have to step backwards in order to move forward. Like, think through what are the possible avenues that will lead you to your long-term plan. And someone mentioned earlier that they are the CEO of their own startup. Now, INSEAD is a global institution, right? So they are interested in people who are looking at businesses from a global perspective. Now, if you have your startup and your startup is regional, perhaps you want to do your INSEAD MBA so that you can take your startup on a more global scale. Then the answer here is going to be something along the lines of, well, how do you still get to make your startup global if you don't get an MBA from INSEAD? And it's not impossible. It's just that it's going to take longer. It's going to require a lot more being at the right time, being at the right place at the right time sort of experiences to get there. So those are some of the elements that you can think about. And obviously, if there's questions in the chat, please bring them up related to this question specifically. Then the next question is, please give full description of your career since graduating from university. Describe your career path with the rationale behind your choices. I like to think of this as essentially you are going to speak about your career starting from college, not where you are now, but starting from your undergraduate experience. And why did you choose that first role? What were you looking to attain? And did you get it? And then why did you move to the next position? Typically, these are about opportunities. So you want to think about what opportunities each of the roles that you've held or each of the companies you've worked at, how did those help you move in the next step in your career progression?
Susan, I have a question there. So someone says, if you're looking at a change in function or department, is it better to mention that or a promotion in your existing role?
If you're looking, as far as the previous question is concerned?
Yes.
Well, it depends on what your goals are. So if a change of function would mean that it's going to it's going to get you to the long-term plan, then mention the change of function. If you are going in the same direction, but you are looking to have a more C-suite kind of role, then it's the promotion that makes sense. It's all dependent on what your goals are. and also what's feasible, right? Because if it's a changing departments, and you are in a very niche space that requires specific training, you always have to think of anything that you talk about in your applications from the lens of, is it actually realistic to be able to do that? Because sometimes I hear candidates talk about, oh, I'm working in this in real estate, for example, and a real estate development, and I want to work in private equity after my MBA. That may be possible, but the probability of one being able to make that jump, it's going to be very difficult. So even if you've heard a story somewhere that someone has done it, it's not the norm. And if it's not the norm, then you shouldn't talk about it. That makes sense.
All right, thank you.
Awesome. All right, very good. Perfect. So if you are, just a very brief sort of interruption here, if you guys are, liking this content and you want to, if you find this information really useful for your application process, please give this video a thumbs up, and also share it with your friends who are considering INSEAD as well. So let's move to the next piece, which is a required question. So discuss your short and long-term career aspirations with an MBA from INSEAD. It's a very specific question, and they only give you 100 words. The way I like to answer the goals question is I do like to start with a North Star. So what is the thing that you look to impact? You are applying to a top-ranked global institution who can choose from anyone they want to choose from as far as applicants are concerned. They are looking to build the next generation of business leaders who are going to make a drastic improvement, ideally, in the business world. So show yourself as someone who is thinking long-term and long-term impact. Then you're going to work backwards, meaning, if you want to change the way the retail space operates, its environmental impact, logistics, you want to then reverse engineer in what role would you need to have to be able to have maximum impact in that space, which would be your long-term plan. And then your short-term plan, reverse engineer that as well. How are you going to get to that long-term vision? If you want to lead strategy, or if you want to lead sustainability of a given organization, what would be required? What would be your post-MBA role that you would need in order to get there as quickly as possible, essentially? And then they're asking specifically, what are your aspirations with an MBA from INSEAD? INSEAD, as I mentioned earlier, is looking for those individuals who are looking to make a business impact on a global scale. So if your goals are really regionally focused, it's not going to be that huge. It's not going to be that interesting to INSEAD. They want to see globally what kind of impact are you going to make and how you're going to use INSEAD's resources, network, and all the things that you get through that experience, and how you're going to leverage that to get yourself and get your career to the next phase. Then there is the optional piece. Essentially, if you're currently not working, if you plan to leave your current job more than 2 months before the application, before the program starts, please explain your activities and occupations before leaving your job and the start of the program. This is optional. If you don't plan to make these moves, you do not need to answer this question. It's truly optional. Although for those of you who follow me on my YouTube channel, you'll hear me say oftentimes, I don't like to leave optional questions unanswered, but there's some that it's okay to leave unanswered if it doesn't apply to you, or if it's not going to add value to your application as a whole. Okay, so international exposure. As you've been hearing me speak, international exposure is really important to INSEAD because they want to know that you'll be able to be successful in a community of extremely diverse people, and that you are comfortable to be in that kind of environment. So they're asking in this section, they're asking you essentially to list your most significant examples of international exposure that you've experienced. This means living somewhere. So if you grew up in one country and have formative years in a given region, you want to list that. If you studied abroad, you want to list that, or perhaps you were in boarding school, you want to list that. Perhaps your work led you to other regions. So I work with consultants who have their basic, their offices are in the States, but they work with clients who are in Europe and end up traveling to Europe for those client projects. That would be a place that you would include in here as well. Any other things that are significant to you that have led you to, work or be in contact with someone outside your region. I've had clients who have gone to different parts of the world to, work on humanitarian activities. That's something that you want to include in here as well. Now let's move on to languages if there's no additional questions on that part. So INSEAD has specific requirements when it comes to languages. You need to have essentially 2 languages before you matriculate, and 1 additional language by the time you graduate. So language is really important there, and most of the candidates that apply to INSEAD already are, have some level of proficiency in the 2 languages. Obviously, you need to showcase proof of that, so there's no exaggerating of one's language capabilities. They will be asking you to actually prove that you can do this. So here is where you will be including the languages that you know and the level of fluency, and they're very specific of where you fall in the level of fluency here.
Hi, Suzanne. Sorry, let me take you back to international exposure.
Yeah.
So someone asked, what is the duration of stay in any specific country that is counted as a legit duration? Is there
Yeah, so it should be somewhat significant. So if you're living, you're typically not going to live for 2 weeks in a country. That's called a, vacation, right? So, but if you're living there for 6 months, that's significant enough. If you are working on a project that is a couple of months, so like, if you're building schools in some part of the developing countries, and it's probably a month or 2 months, you will include that. But the key component here is they tell you it's the most significant example. So they don't want you to list every single thing that you have done. It's just what has been most significant to you.
Gotcha. Thank you.
All right, so let's move on to activities and interests. Here you are going to list essentially extracurricular activities in which you have been involved in, starting with your most recent activities. So this is sports, performing arts, associations you've been a part of. Perhaps you are part of a junior board, club memberships. This is in typically during college, any kind of hobbies that you are significantly involved in. So if something you do consistently, community activities. So if you are helping your community raise funds for, to build a playground or to build a doggy, doggy playground or something like that, that has significant commitment from your part, you want to include it in here. You're going to list the activity, and you have kinds of activities that they have for you to consider as far as like what is considered an activity, and then the time frame and the position that you have in here. You can add rows if there's more than 3, or you can keep it at 3, or you can just include 1 if all you have is 1. Awards list here. You want to list any distinctions, honors, and awards you've achieved through your extracurricular activities. So this is very specific. It's not, I received, an award at my job for, the best manager of the month, right? This is specific to your extracurriculars. And extracurriculars sometimes are associated with your job. So for example, I've had a client who worked for a major consulting firm, and part of his extracurriculars involved working on a project through the company, but the project was specifically focused on supporting the way students learn. And it was specifically building classes and building teaching models and mentorship programs for the students in their given geographies. So that component, although it was technically associated with the organization, that element was not part of the applicant's job description. So that would be considered an extracurricular activity, and the award associated with it would be considered, would be something that if that applicant applied to INSEAD, would have included it in this section. Then we're going to move on to the supplemental information. Okay, I'm just keeping track of time here. Here they want to know if there is any family members that is has attended or is attending INSEAD. You're going to include the information here, so their name, your relationship to you, and program that they've attended. So this means any one of the INSEAD programs. So if it's the MBA or any other program that they have, you would include that in here. If there's any specific needs that you have, or special arrangements or disabilities that you want the school to know, you would include that information in here. Again, this is optional. It's not necessary if there's none. You want to share the plan of attending the program with a partner and or child if that applies to you. Again, if it doesn't apply, don't include anything, don't make up anything, you're totally okay. If you are considering the dual degree, you will include that in here. This is a drop-down list, so very straightforward. And then which other schools you apply to. This is a question I always get every time we go through the application portal with all my clients. How transparent should I be? I think you want to be transparent where it necessarily makes sense. You have essentially here 3 schools to list, and you want to share that. Sometimes this is actually helpful in the sense of, if you're admitted and you're trying to negotiate scholarship, if you can leverage your admissions to other schools to negotiate. However, if that information hasn't been included in here, it may it may present yourself as someone who is secretive, which is not always a good thing, especially for schools that are looking to really build community. If you've had military service, you would include that in here as well. Then you have letters of recommendation. There are 2 letters of recommendation required for INSEAD. They're very straightforward. What happens here is that you're going to include the first name, last name, email address, and phone number of the recommender. As soon as you save this, they will immediately receive an email with a link to complete the letter of recommendation. Essentially, you want to do that once you've had a conversation with the recommenders. So you shouldn't fill this in if you haven't had conversations with them And you want to give them at least some inclination around why you've chosen the program, and what would you want the recommenders to particularly highlight in your application, in their letters of recommendation in relation to their working with you.
Susan, question here on the LOR. So someone who owns a company and has a partner is asking who to get their LOR from, considering that they are the CEO of their own company.
Yes. So for individuals like that, that have that specific problem, I have seen successful applicants essentially ask a client to write the letter of recommendation. If they have, contractors that they work with that are external, they can write the letters of recommendation. A partner, someone who is like on equal footing as you or below you in sort of hierarchy of things, is not really the right person to write the letter of recommendation. So think creatively, or who are the other people that you work with on a day-to-day basis that can speak to your accomplishments. So if you have, maybe you have investors, an investor would definitely be someone who can speak to that, or maybe if there's a board member, they can definitely speak to it as well. And also, if you have, like, if none of those apply, if you have a mentor, someone who you who coaches you along the way of that in the journey, then definitely you want to consider them. What is important is that whoever you choose, that their letter of recommendation is going to have specific examples speaking about your contributions and your impact. So if the person you are considering has a really fancy title, but you haven't really talked to them about much in your business, you haven't worked with them in any sort of capacity, know them as an acquaintance, that's not the right person to write the letter of recommendation, even if they are INSEAD alum.
How about a top client?
A top client is perfect. Yes. Awesome. But you need two. And you need two.
Okay.
They don't have to be two clients. It can be a client. Yeah. Or it can be two clients if you have two clients that you think would support you. But it should be, you will need two people to speak about you and your contributions. And now let's get to the questions that everyone always asks about, which is the essays themselves. So the essays are, they want to get to know, so INSEAD wants to get to know you, who you are, what your motivations are. So the first question is an introduction of yourself, who you are as a person, stressing your personal characteristics you feel are your strengths and weaknesses. So you'll see this across the board with INSEAD. They want to know where you're really good at, and do you know what your weaknesses are? Because that's the only way that you can grow, right? It's not just putting forth your most amazing accomplishments, which obviously are important because we're looking at your future potential from the perspective of, your backstory. However, they're also looking for thoughtful individuals who have taken stock of where they are in their professional career and what are their strengths and what are their weaknesses. The weaknesses is something that you want to be developing and you want to be, working on improving. So in here, you really want to be speaking about yourself and recognizing where your strengths and where your weaknesses are. Typically here, you want to present your evolution on a professional level and also on a personal level, and to make sure that you give some examples. Examples are important to illustrate any point that you're giving. So if you're giving 3 points, that means you need 3 examples. So be mindful that you only have 500 words. Probably 3 points is going to be a little bit too much to include in here, but maybe 2 points is pretty solid, one of which is going to be your real strengths. What values do you bring? And the other one is going to be areas for development that you have identified and how you have grown from identifying that and what you have done to develop that area. Next question is describe the achievements in which you are most proud of and explain why. So why is it that you are most proud of in developing this technological tool? Like, what impact typically has it had that you are so proud of in that accomplishment? Or you have built something that you initially thought that you couldn't even do. Like, why is that, personal, even if externally people may not necessarily see it as a big deal, why is it such an important thing for you on an internal perspective? And sometimes the most genuine applications where they have real reflection are the ones that make the final cut. They also want, again, where you failed, and then how did you learn from that experience, as well as how did the failure impact your relationship with others. So if you failed a client, how did it impact that relationship, and were you able to overcome it, essentially? The next question, in 300 words, describe all type of extra professional activities in which you have been or are still involved for a significant amount of time. How are you enriched by these activities? So this is touching on the international component of INSEAD and your growth from the perspective of being part of community. So here, these are not extracurriculars from the perspective of academia, but these are extracurriculars from the perspective of, like what I mentioned earlier, in your job. So since you graduated college, what are some extracurricular activities that you are that you have been or are still involved in for a significant amount of time? And the enrichment component here is, why did you do it for so long? And what did you learn, whether it's learning about someone else or even learning about yourself in the process of working on this project. And the final question, where you have 300 words to respond, and this is common among many schools, is anything else that we haven't covered or you haven't covered in this application that we should know. Here's where you would include it. Typically, there is, schools have different word count limitations. So once you have one, you may need, you tweak it based on the word count limitations between schools. And then the supplemental information is the final component, where you're just going to attach your transcript, the tests that you have taken, the awards and additional letters, and your CV is going to go in here. The final thing, and I know we have 3 minutes, is you are going to, 48 hours after the deadline in which you're applying, you will have to complete a Kira video interview. In this, you have 4 questions, and you should really prepare answers, or at least be familiar with it and be ready to answer various kinds of questions. The questions are going to be about motivations and why INSEAD, your collaboration abilities. So, how do you work? How do you help others? How you handle conflict? Kinds of questions. So they're random questions, but they follow sort of those categories: diversity and culture. So how how you've grown as a result of being in an environment of diverse people. Questions related to that. So you want to have at least a few examples prepared in advance. And then you have sort of kind of a random question that can be, anything between what is the book that you like, or who's a person you admire, or something just like really random. And what's important here is that you're going to really speak about your values and what matters to you. So any answer that you give, you're going to really think from a reflective perspective on why is it that you're including what it is you're including. So you'll have 45 seconds to prepare your response on the day when you're actually sitting for the video essay. And then you have 1 minute to give your full response. And part of this process is to actually practice what it means to give a 1 minute response, because any ums or any pauses are chipping away at the clock that is going to stop on the 60-second mark. So it's really important to make sure that you carve out time to prepare, because all you have is 48 hours after you submit after the deadline of your target round to complete this, so that your application can be considered ready to be reviewed and to move to the next step. Awesome. So that is the INSEAD application. I know we're exactly on the 1 hour. So
Yes.
if,
Thank you so much, Suzanne. I've been answering some of the questions in the comments, so we don't really have too many questions left. Do you have any other thing you want to add?
Yeah,
About the remaining questions.
absolutely. So one thing I will say, I just wanted to essentially reiterate here, is that INSEAD is really looking for those leaders, future leaders, who are thinking about their role in the business world from a perspective of global impact. So your contributions, and your future contributions in particular, should take into account how you want to be someone who is going to lead an organization, lead an industry, lead an element of the work that you're doing on more on a global scale, and not just regional. So that's going to be an important selling point here, and be mindful of that in your application, and just make sure that you really showcase throughout your application preparation material, that you are someone who cares about teamwork, who cares about diversity of perspectives, and you can show that in your resume, and you can show that in your essay responses through examples, and also, of course, when you are in your interview. Make sure that your goals are very attainable. They have to be ambitious, of course, because you wouldn't be pursuing an MBA, but they do have to be attainable, because if they're not, one, it may lead to not actually getting an interview, but even if you get an interview, you are going to be questioned a lot about your goals, because typically you are paired with someone in the field that you are interested in, to make sure that your goals are actually feasible and attainable. So those are my last commentary for everyone, and I wish everyone wonderful application season with many admissions and much scholarship. And of course, you can feel free to reach out to me and see admissions to have a conversation about your specific application.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Suzanne. How much time do we have left? I know we're after time, but I don't know if we still have any more time. Some of the questions that some people have asked around extracurricular activities. So some people are asking, how much of hobbies can they put as extracurricular activities? Someone said they got an award from doing a marathon, or they've been, baking. Can they include this in their essays, or can they quantify this some way as extracurricular activities?
Yes, if it's significant to them, for sure they can include it in their applications. But it should be something that's significant. So you have to be mindful that everything in your application can either should actually serve to add value to your candidacy. So if you are, and part of this process is choosing what should be there and choosing what should not be there, because of course you can't write your entire life story in an application, and you cannot expect the admission team to actually choose what they want to read and what they don't want to read. From their perspective, you are a mature person who has discerned that this is important and this is not important, right? So if you include, liking to cook with your mom, I don't think that's actually going to be valuable. That's great that you're doing it, and obviously your mom does appreciate that, but it's not something that's going to move the admission team. However, if you cook with your mom and you take that food to a local shelter, that is a different kind of story that you're sharing, right? So that means that you are doing something from a family perspective, but then you are contributing to the community at large. So think of your experiences and your contributions from the perspective of not just I have, accomplished this, which is also great, but you do want to think about the sort of collective impact as well.
All right. Thank you so much, Susan. It was so great to have you. Thank you so much, everyone, for watching. Please don't forget to hit like on this video. I've been dropping that in the comments. So in case you've missed it, please don't forget to hit like on this video. We have the Colombia session coming up next. So if you're interested in applying and watching that, you can also go ahead to join that live session. It was so great to have everyone here. Please make sure that you drop any more comments you have. We'll see it later on and can reply you. Thank you so, so much. We wish you all the best as you apply to INSEAD and have a great rest of your day, whether it's your morning or afternoon or evening. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you for the opportunity to talk about INSEAD.
All right. Bye bye, everyone. Bye.